Some foods sit in our memories like lullabies, folded into stews, echoed in the way we butter bread, held in the sound of boiling water. Others linger by habit, familiar, not because they still love us, but because we stopped asking if they ever did. At 60, 70, even 85. A body doesn't raise its voice anymore. It tightens, swells, withholds sleep, wobbles quietly, then waits to be noticed. Not all aches come from age. Some begin with what we invite onto our plates. And the body, though slower, still listens. Sometimes healing isn't about more medicine. Sometimes it begins with what we choose not to swallow. Number 1. Broccoli Richard always said broccoli tasted like damp cardboard. It was never part of his table, never something he chose, just something people told him he should. But something began to shift after his morning walks left him wincing. The right knee first, then both. A deep, dragging soreness that lingered longer than it used to. He didn't tell anyone at first, just sat a little longer on the bench outside the bakery, moved a little slower, getting up from the couch. Then, one afternoon, his daughter brought over a meal, broccoli lightly steamed, olive oil, lemon zest, soft green against white china. He almost didn't eat it, but hunger overruled memory, and strangely, it didn't taste like punishment. It tasted warm, quiet. He ate it again the next day, and the next. Not because it was delicious, but because, for the first time in weeks, he climbed the stairs without gripping the railing. His doctor later explained something about sulforaphane and how certain compounds in cruciferous vegetables ease joint inflammation, gently protect aging cartilage. Richard didn't need the details. He just knew that the pain had softened, the edge blunted. So, he made it a ritual. Each evening, before the 7 o'clock news, he'd steam a small bowl, sit by the window, eat slowly, with both hands cupping the dish like it might whisper something useful. Sometimes he added garlic, sometimes just salt and a squeeze of lemon, and sometimes nothing at all. But every time, he rinsed the bowl under warm water after, palms resting against porcelain, shoulders loosened by gratitude, not for flavor, but for the quiet return of a strength number 2. Spinach Helen didn't grow up with spinach. To her, it had always tasted like apology, overcooked, wet, wilted beside things she'd rather remember. She used to push it around her plate politely, the way we do with things we don't want to hurt. But in her late 80s, something shifted. The forgetting began gently. First names, then grocery lists, then the way her slippers sometimes ended up in the fridge. She didn't panic. She just grew quiet. And in the quiet, she noticed her mornings had lost shape. The kettle still boiled, the radio still hummed, but her mind, fogged, floating, felt further from the room than her body. One morning, she opened the fridge and saw the bag again. Spinach softening at the edges, not hopeful, just present. She took a handful, tossed it into her eggs, watched the green curl into yellow, and ate. No miracle came, but the next morning felt less distant. She did it again, and again. Within weeks, her thoughts moved more cleanly, her feet more surely. The crossword returned. So did her appetite. Her doctor spoke of nitrates, how leafy greens support oxygen to the brain, how folate feeds memory from the inside out. But Helen just smiled. She wasn't feeding herself science, she was feeding herself back to herself. Each morning, she rinsed the leaves in cool water, thumbs rubbing the grit from the veins. It became a quiet ritual, a way to begin with care instead of forgetting. She still didn't love the taste, but she loved the steadiness. And sometimes, when she stirred the pan, she'd whisper the names of things she wanted to remember, just to keep them warm a little longer. 3. Carrots. Ernest didn't notice the blur at first, just a shadow where the morning paper used to be sharp. An extra squint, a sentence reread twice. He chalked it up to tiredness, a smudge on his glasses, a trick of the light. But it kept happening, the print softening, the corners of rooms losing their edge. Not gone, just faded. Like a memory the body hadn't decided to forget, but no longer knew how to keep clear. He tried reading with more lamps, moving chairs, tilting his head, but the world stayed soft. Then one afternoon, while sorting the pantry, he found a bag of carrots. They reminded him of his mother, Sunday stews, hands stained orange, and the way she always said, "Carrots help you see through the dark." He smiled and grated one into his soup that night, then another the next day, and another. He didn't expect anything, but slowly he stopped leaning forward so much, stopped tilting the lamp. The headlines returned with edges. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Beta-carotene, his niece explained at a visit. An antioxidant for the eyes, something about macular resilience. He just nodded. All he knew was that he could read the crossword again and get past Tuesday. He began peeling them in the quiet before dinner, ribbons of orange falling like curls of memory. He lined them up like prayer beads, a soft ritual, not for vision, but for steadiness. He still wore glasses, still missed the sharpness of younger eyes. But now, when he looked at the page, he didn't feel lost. He felt like someone still trying to see the world clearly, and slowly succeeding. 4. Eggplant harming. Margaret always loved eggplant, the way it browned in olive oil, the way it soaked up garlic, salt, and warmth, like a memory you didn't know you missed until it touched your tongue again. She cooked it the way her mother did, slow, low flame, no timer, just instinct. The same pot, the same wooden spoon, smooth thin with years. But lately, her hands had started whispering. First in the mornings, a stiffness like dew in her knuckles, then during chopping, a quiet resistance when closing the jar. She didn't think it was the food. How could it be? It was comfort. It was memory. But her body told a different story. Not with anger, but with fatigue. One afternoon, after serving a favorite dish to her neighbor, she sat down, lifted her cup, and felt the familiar sting return. Not sharp, but certain. She paused, not in fear, just in wonder. And the next day she cooked something else, not to abandon the eggplant, just to see. A week passed, the swelling faded. She fastened her watch with ease. Her ring slid on without apology. She read somewhere, later, that eggplant contains solanine, a compound that can inflame the joints in some aging bodies. She didn't hold a grudge against the vegetable. She just understood now that even comfort can overstay its welcome. She still kept eggplant in the fridge, still touched it at the market, but she listened more closely now and cooked it only when the body said yes with silence. Letting go, she realized, wasn't rejection. It was choosing to honor the version of her who still wanted to lift teacups and open doors without negotiating with her bones. 5. Potatoes. Harming. John never meant to give up potatoes. They were his comfort, mashed under butter, crisped on cold mornings, folded into soups that smelled like family. He never thought much about them, only that they filled him. And in a world that had grown quieter, filling felt like a kind of safety. But lately, his body had started resisting. Sleep grew shallow, his ankles stiffened after dinner. He moved slower in the mornings, like his legs had forgotten how to wake before the sun. At first, he blamed the chair, the mattress, the rain. But then, one night, he ate lentils instead, not by plan, just by chance. The pantry was low, and he was tired. The next morning, his body didn't argue when he stood. His balance held. His breath felt clearer. He tried it again, then again. And slowly, he realized the heaviness had a source. Not age, not time, but something white and familiar he'd trusted without question. A nutritionist once told him about starch and sugar, glycemic spikes, and silent inflammation. He'd nodded politely, but the words passed through him like smoke. Now, though, his body had begun telling him the same story, in aches, in swelling, in the way his steps no longer ended with strength. He didn't quit potatoes, he just stopped needing them. His dinners changed, he learned new rituals, simmering red lentils with turmeric, roasting beets until they bled sweetness, eating slower, chewing longer. Some nights, he still missed them, the salt, the crunch, the childhood comfort. But then he'd remember how his knees used to groan, how sleep used to break. And he'd reach for his bowl, warm and quiet, and give thanks not for what he was eating, but for what he was no longer enduring. 6. Green bell pepper, harming. Samuel always thought green bell peppers were harmless. They looked fresh, smelled clean, added crunch to anything. He'd sliced them into omelets for decades, habit, not celebration. But over time, something began to feel off. Not pain exactly, just interruption. A bloated kind of fullness after breakfast. A fog that hung over the afternoon. Legs that didn't quite cooperate during his garden walks. He blamed the weather, his shoes, the way time sometimes folds into itself after 80. But then, one week, he ran out of peppers. Didn't buy more, didn't think it mattered, and yet. His stomach softened, his gait steadied. The air inside his chest felt more generous. He noticed his belt was easier to fasten, that he hadn't needed the armrest to get out of the recliner. Still, he didn't connect the dots. Not until the peppers returned. Just one. Chopped into a stir-fry. That night, the swelling in his feet returned. The morning, harder. He stood in front of the mirror, holding the leftover half. It looked innocent, vibrant. But sometimes beauty hides incompatibility. A physician had once mentioned lectins, certain compounds in raw vegetables that, for some aging guts, could stir quiet inflammation, blunt absorption, muddy circulation. He hadn't understood it then, but his body did now. He didn't throw them out. He gave them to a neighbor, and in return, she brought squash. He sliced it slowly that night, hands steady, movements deliberate. There was no bitterness in the shift, just clarity. Now, each week, he walks past the peppers at the market. Still bright, still calling. But he smiles, touches them gently, and walks on. He doesn't miss them. He misses how long it took to realize that some things we've always eaten don't always belong in who we've become. Some losses come dressed in flavor. They don't cry out. They just stop greeting you with ease. You notice it slowly, a heaviness in the knees, a night of restless turning, a cup too hard to lift without explanation. But the food still waits on your plate, still smells like your mother's kitchen, still knows all your rituals by heart. So, you eat. And for a while, you pretend you haven't changed. We're not always grieving people. Sometimes we grieve the things that once meant comfort, but now ask too much in return. And that grief is quiet. It doesn't come with funerals, just a soft refusal from the body. You realize you've stopped looking forward to dinner, that you walk slower after certain meals. That fullness has started to feel like forgetting. Letting go of that food, the one you've seasoned 1,000 times, that knew your hands better than your thoughts, can feel like leaving a piece of yourself behind. But slowly, you learn something else. That grief can also be respect. That choosing not to chew what no longer loves you is its own kind of wisdom. You don't hate the food. You just stop pretending it's still safe. And when you find a new ritual, one that nourishes without consequence, you feel something uncoil inside you. A small return. Not of taste, but of trust. And you understand, perhaps for the first time, that honoring the past sometimes means letting go of what no longer fits inside your future. You don't need to transform. You're not a project. You're a story still unfolding in the slow curve of your shoulder, the softened rhythm of your walk, the quiet way your hands remember things even when your mind forgets. There is no race left, only presence. only the steady, steady task of staying with yourself in this body. Not the one you had, not the one you hoped for, but the one that stayed. And it has stayed through all the meals that gave more than they took, and all the ones that didn't. You don't owe anyone a younger version of you. What you owe is kindness to the version that wakes up each morning, stretches slowly, and still tries. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose something that doesn't make you feel worse. Not because it's perfect, but because it's gentle, because it listens. And in that choosing, something loosens. A jaw unclenches, a breath returns, and the self that's been waiting, quietly, patiently, starts to come back into the room with you. Not with noise, not with urgency, just a soft reintroduction to who you already are when no one is asking you to be anything else. You've done enough striving. You've asked your body to keep up through decades of weather, grief, love that came and went without warning. It kept showing up, quietly, faithfully. Even when you didn't know how to listen, it stayed. And now, after everything, it still wants to walk beside you. Not fast, not far, just without ache, without apology. The answers don't live in perfect meals or strict plans or the quiet guilt of missing what no longer serves you. They live in gentler choices. A hand that hovers before it grabs. A spoon that stirs slower than it used to. A question whispered, not about what's right, but about what feels kind. You can still love what you used to. You just don't have to carry all of it anymore. Let one thing go. Let another stay. And see what returns. Maybe it's breath. Maybe it's sleep. Maybe it's your own name, spoken to yourself with less judgment and more care. If this path feels softer, it's because it was never paved for speed, only for presence. And if walking it feels right, know that you don't walk alone. We'll be here, not ahead, not behind, just beside you, as always. Until next time, take one quieter bite, one longer breath, and take care of your story.